Welcome back to another episode of Business Journey Unlocked. Today, I'm joined by Lawerence Ho, CEO of Maximum Freight, a company operating in logistics and international freight forwarding space. Lawerence brings over a decade of hands-on experience across air, ocean, and inland transportation, specializing in complex shipments, including hazardous material and project cargo. Lawrence, welcome to the show. I'm going to turn it over to you to give you the proper introduction you deserve.
Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, when you started naming all that experience, it kind of like jogged my memory on all the things I've been through in terms of being in the logistics industry. Just a quick background on me. I think I've actually been in logistics for close to 20 years now. I started in 2008, seven, somewhere there, with a very small company, moved to a mid-sized company. And in 2017, me and my current partners went independent and started Maximum Freight. And we've been doing that ever since. Since then, we started as a small little operation, just taking on various odds and end jobs. And now we have a warehouse, a trucking operation, and we pretty much cover everything: ocean, air, land, rail, project cargo. So that's kind of my brief background. In addition to that, I have other businesses that are unrelated. So been kind of been an entrepreneur for the last 10 years in retail and also logistics.
Yeah, I love how you're just putting yourself out there, not in terms of just the logistic part, but also how you have other companies as well. So focusing on the freight company, since you mentioned you have 20 years of experience, 20 plus, what gap did you see in the freight forwarding industry that convinced you to use your unique background in order to solve certain logistic problems?
I would say our primary motivation to go forward and go independent is when we started, me and my partner, his name is actually Maximum, so hence Maximum Freight. uh but we both started with a very small forwarding operation. I'm talking a tiny office. When we left, it was in Hoboken, and it was just two employees, me and him. Once in a while we'd get help maybe from some third parties, but very small operation. We worked with one particular office in India overseas. And because it was so small, we ended up doing everything, like
Mm,
we managed the office, we managed all the customer service. It was an A to Z operation. And we both moved to the same mid-sized company. And at the time, it was about 200, just over 200 employees. So still a very small company. It had a little bit more of a global presence. It was a European based company, UK based actually, and still very small. And when we joined that company, it felt kind of the same, in the sense that we worked very closely with the customer. We had a lot of autonomy where we could kind of make decisions on how to best handle the client. And because it was a small company, it forced us to do everything, right? So a lot of times when you work with bigger companies, you specialize just in one thing, maybe just imports, and it might just be ocean imports or air imports or air exports or ocean exports, or maybe you just do customs, or maybe you just do warehousing. We did all of it. We did full containers, less than container, full truck, less than truckload. We dealt with the rail. We did special projects. We did cargo. We even, chartered space on planes and sometimes on vessels, right? So we didn't say no to anything. And that company eventually got bought out. And when it got bigger, we noticed somewhat immediately, maybe within a year, that intimacy and that closeness you had with the customer and the autonomy to make decisions and create systems that you felt were best for the client started to fade away. Became a little bit more like a machine. So we decided, hey, we gather all this experience, and we know how to deal with these clients one on one. So why not recreate that small business working super close with your customer environment again, doing it on our own? I think at that point we had enough confidence and experience to pull away and give it a shot independently, and that's what we did. So um that's kind of where we saw the opportunity. It wasn't so much like a market shift per se. It was more a shift within our own brand, and us working with very, very big forwarders and logistics operations. It was always very disconnected. And so we said, hey, let's try to recreate this small grassroots brand, but within the logistics industry. And that's how Maximum Freight came to be.
What I really love about that is just you leveraging your background, right? Both you guys leveraging your background in the best way to not only have the machine aspect, but also go back to the small company, because at the end of the day, people connect with people. And when you kind of have somewhat of a barrier between the actual customers and then you as well as CEO, as operating partners, when that connection's kind of faded, what's going to happen? You're not going to know what's going on between those aspects. And it's just everything's just kind of like float away, right? In essence. So I feel like the
Yep.
hardest thing is just figuring out how you can implement that. How did you, with everything you've gotten so far, how were you able to really grasp that small company connection feel while also scaling a profitable business?
It's definitely harder because um if you want to be that close with your customer, it is higher touch.
Mhm.
You're gonna, we give our cell phone numbers out to our customers. So that means you're gonna be getting calls in the morning, calls in the night, when you're with your family, calls on the weekend. So it definitely takes a degree of additional, I don't know if sacrifice is the right word, but you're gonna have to kind of lay it out there, right? Like you're gonna have to pay more attention. It's every single job that you take will have way more intention, way more accountability, and more time and energy. But our theory is that if you provide that level of service, it will reflect in the quality of what you're providing and earn the trust of your customer. And our ambition has always been to grow with the customer, to keep them long term, and to know their operations so well that they don't want to go out and just shop it around, right? In logistics, unfortunately, it is a very cost and price based motivated behavior in terms of client and service provider. Everyone's shopping around, and that's fair because it's expensive, right? So you have to shop around, you have to be smart with your budget. So our goal was always to be not the cheapest freight forwarder and logistics provider, just to be the best one for what you're paying, and to provide such a intimate and intricate connection to our client's business that um they don't just look at it as a number. They don't just look at it as another quote, but almost a integral and crucial part of their business. That's what we've always strived to be. Um so that's kind of like our incentive and our motivation to when we deal with with our customers.
So even if you have the right relationships, the right background and experience, it is still pretty difficult to get the business up and running, building that momentum, building the pipeline. So based on the experiences you had, mainly in building Maximum Freight, what was the most challenging aspect in kind of grabbing and building that momentum to going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question because in forwarding, I would say client acquisition, customer acquisition is one of the hardest things to crack because much of it is based upon trust and word of mouth. And so if you're kind of starting out there as a brand new company, it is pretty tough. Now, me and my two other partners at that point were pretty well rooted into the industry. So a lot of people knew us. Um, Also at the time, the way we did approach it a little bit differently in the sense that we used Google Ads, and Now it's a little bit different. That space is very saturated, but in the beginning we kind of did a hybrid. We used Google Ads, so we used like modern advertising, which at the time forwarders were not really doing that. It was more existing business and agent to agent business and referrals, a lot of inside sales. To see a logistics company really spend a lot on internet marketing was not so common. As at least the companies I worked for and the vendors that I worked for, they didn't really invest in that. Most of their business was just word of mouth and agent to agent and just kind of inner networks is kind of how they built their book. We did that too, but in addition to that, we spent a lot of money in the probably the first 3 years on, you know, social media marketing, Google marketing, and just kind of non-traditional ways of marketing compared to within the logistics space anyway. Um, but it is really tough to crack because, you know, if you're a restaurant, if you're there's certain businesses, maybe retail, it's kind of someone can try a new pizza spot or a new barber or things like that. But when it comes to logistics, a lot of it's built on trust and who you know and how long you've kind of been. Like that's why a lot of businesses within a network of known agents and stuff, because people don't want to shift to someone they're not familiar with. So it was a bit of a mix between those two. And it was definitely challenging. But one thing that we did do was focus on small to medium businesses, particularly people who had just started importing or exporting,
Mhm.
instead of people who are well established and had been like shipping for years and years. Those clients are much tougher to get them to switch over. So we targeted people who were newer to shipping, newer to importing, exporting. And our pitch was kind of, hey, if you're new to this, we're very experienced. Let us kind of walk you through that process and make this the part of logistics in your company very easy and very hands free. So that was kind of our approach, and it seemed to work. I think our business now has shifted a little bit more towards people who are established companies and brands, but we still have that small business, newer importer exporter feel. So we always wanted to keep that essential and kind of as part of our foundation within our how we represent our brand and our customer service.
I find that really good from the fact is even though you're evolving into something different, you're still trying to keep that foundation. And that's the best thing to do because when people kind of forget why they started, how they started, then it kind of defeats the purpose of starting the business in the first place. There's just so many different methods of outreach. As you mentioned before, you did a non-traditional approach at that time, which was running Google ads. Now it's oversaturated, as you mentioned before. So it's just you trying to figure out what's best, just doing different approaches, different angles to trying to gain the competitive edge into your niche and kind of going from there. And it's really hard, as you mentioned, to get people going into another freight company when they're already well established. It's very difficult to do that. Very, very
Yeah, super
difficult.
super hard. Very hard. People, and for good reason, you know, shipping is largely based on uh trust because you are in essence surrendering valuable cargo
Okay.
to another party. They will have pretty much absolute control over it for a period of time while it's in transit. From a financial standpoint, a lot of times, if you are, depending on the structure of the shipment, you may be putting forward money for the freight, which you won't recover until it's delivered. So you're going to be, you know, out some money for some time, and you have to make sure that the person on the other end is going to make good on your invoices. And there's a lot of time where you don't have control over your money or your goods, right? So that's why people really want to have a trustworthy partner. And I think the only way to establish that is by, especially when you're new, is by like really good communication and showing that you're going above and beyond when it comes to handling people's shipments. We noticed it with really, really big forwarders and logistic companies in the industry, you know, they're just kind of like you call the phone number and it's prompts, um, and then you get someone and they're just really there to hang up as quickly as possible, which I'm sure we kind of find in every industry, and I think people have kind of gotten tired of that. So we want to create something and earn business and find business in presenting an approach that wasn't like that. You know, it was very interpersonal, it was very close, and just felt like you were dealing with people and not a company or a brand. That's always been kind of our angle.
I have dealt with businesses in the past where their main focus is on attracting new clientele, which is obvious. It's the best way to do to grow and expand your business. But sometimes what I've noticed is even though they're so fixated on the new clientele, they forget that the clientele that they have already is still as important. But when they're so fixated on just gaining new people, what's gonna happen? There's people that are gonna fall through the cracks. There's gonna people that don't like the treatment that they're getting. Why are you treating the new people a lot better than someone who's been with the company for, let's say, 5, 10 years? Like,
Yeah,
what advantage is that? Nothing.
that's a tough balance too in logistics because growth is so crucial, right? You always have to be growing your business, but you can't let that growth overwhelm your existing business.
Mhm.
So it's a tough balance to play around with. We try to make sure that we have enough resources to meet the demands of our existing clients because they are at the end of the day the backbone of our company, and we're careful not to just say yes to everything in the beginning. If you're starting a business, it's very easy to kind of say yes to everything, you know, and in some cases that can be a good thing, but I would say the only time you have to be very careful with that is if it's going to come at the expense of the service you provide to an existing customer. So we have been pretty, I would say we've been pretty responsible with our growth. We do analyze the demands of our customers before we just commit to anything. Particularly now that we moved into warehouse operations, you have to be careful with that, right? Because you have a finite amount of space. So you can't just say yes to everything because you literally have now a limited actual physical capacity that you have to manage. So there's a lot of balancing there. And then, if someone needs a project or something that's very intricate and is very time intensive, we need to make sure that we dedicate time in quoting that project out properly, instead of just saying yes and giving the lowest number. Because I do think you see a lot of that now. You see people just give the lowest number because they just want to say yes and they just want to win the business. And then later down the line, when the shipment is on the way and things happen, they go back to the customer and they say, well, what we quoted you is not accurate because this, and this happened. And now
Mhm.
you owe us more money, which leaves a really bad taste in the customer's mouth. So, um, we spend a lot of time, not just, you know, looking at what the customer wants, but when they ask for a quote and when they ask us, for information on a particular job, we spend a lot of time developing that quote. It's not just a quick number. And when we provide it for them, we spend a lot of time explaining why that is. We almost line by line because they're like, why? We get this a lot. Why is your number more than the next guy's number? And we're like, well, let's sit down and talk about it. Let's learn about every part and stage of your shipment and why we quoted it that way. And it helps us because we're now accurately quoting our customer and providing the actual service level that they're asking for. And it helps them because sometimes they're not even aware that what they're asking for is as complex as they might think it is.
Well, it's also going from the fact that you're educating the customer, okay?
Yep.
So it's it's hard because at the end of the day, people want the cheapest, most affordable price, but then there's a caveat to that. Why is it so cheap? Why is it so affordable? There has to be a reason why. And as you mentioned before, it's from the fact that there's a lot of companies, especially starting out, that want to say yes to everything. They want to be the yes man. And it's hard in that approach because even if you've been in the if with you, for example, with your experience, you had 20 plus years, but doing it and actually starting a business, it's a whole different ballpark. So
Yeah.
even though you have knowledge and experience, it's just you got to figure out who your clientele would be, and then you define their criterias in which would determine if this guy's worth having on as a client or not. And it's very hard to do that in the beginning because you don't have that track record. You don't have the reps and the sets in
Right.
to actually accurately do that. And that's the
Right.
biggest issue when starting out.
Right. That's one advantage we did have is because our formal positions had us quote out everything. Again, it was a very hands-on A to Z role that we all played, and I'm very thankful for that because I think a lot of people might come out of the industry after a decade, but they only did one thing, so they don't know how to quote. They don't know who to go to get those numbers. Um, but when we came out with our experience, we were very prepared for that. So if someone came with a particular project, we're asking for a quote on a shipment or an export and import, we knew right away. Um, we knew so when we get asked for a quote, a number, that the most important thing that you can do is knowing the questions you need to ask your client. You can't just take what they're giving you at face value. We get so many quote requests that are very incomplete, for lack of a better word. They kind of just say something like, how much is it for ocean freight from China to New York for a car, right? Which sounds like a complete question, but we really take the time and say, well, how old is this car? What type of car is it? How much does it weigh? What are the dimensions? How soon do you need it? You know, how valuable is it? Do you need insurance? Like all these things will play a critical role when giving them a quote and explain to them what they're actually looking for. In the logistics business, educating your customer is very important because I think people are used to just ordering things on, say, Amazon or online, right? So it's like, well, I click a button and it goes from here to there. And we're very used to that service. And we kind of imagine that freight is kind of like that, but it's just a bigger box. And that's really not the case. It's actually far more involved than that. You have customs to deal with both on the shipment side and on the receiving side. You have other regulatory entities that can be involved. And a lot of times, if it's a personal shipment versus a commercial shipment, you know, it can be very different. So educating your customer and saying, you know, you have to consider all these aspects before we give you a number. Sometimes we educate them and we've had people say, "Oh, well, you know what? Based on everything you told me, I can't do this shipment. It's not even worth it for me because I'm not prepared or I don't have the budget or I don't know any of the answers to the questions that you're asking me. So I'm not prepared for this shipment." And that's good because if you were just to give them a number and then they commit to a supplier or they commit some other way and they kind of get the ball rolling and halfway across the ocean they start finding out that there's all these other steps they have to take. And I've had this happen many times when customers came kind of unprepared and kind of learned the hard way. So yeah, educating your customer and taking the time to make sure that they're advised in every way possible before committing to anything is really important. And I think that's one thing that sets us apart from a lot of other companies.
Well, it's really key too because you're actually taking the time to understand from A to Z what exactly to do instead of just saying, "All right, here's a number, you gonna take it or not." It just
Right.
shows the dedication, the determination that you actually go into fulfilling the request. So since you deal with also international, given the current shifts in the global supply chain in terms of reliability and regulatory practices, what is one strategic shift that shippers must prioritize right now to maintain a competitive edge compared to other competitors?
I would say if you're shipping to the United States, so if you're an exporter trying to bring goods into the United States, um, you you really have to study what's going on with all the new tariff laws and
Mhm.
regulations. We had to take the time to really study that. I'm a licensed customs broker as well, and when all the tariff rules changed, even I had to do an extremely deep dive on studying that topic intricately, because it changed every day. I remember I spent one day, like an entire day, studying the rules, studying what the percentages were for a particular customer. And I went the next day to the office and I spoke to Max, my partner, and I said, "Oh, hey, I did the research and this is the number." And he said, "That's not the number." I'm like, "How is that not the number? Like I literally just got this information." He's like, "Yeah, because they just passed a bill that's active today that changes all of that, right?" So I think you definitely can't wing it. The more, and you don't have to know it yourself, by the way. Like, I think if anything, it's very important to have competent people that you can trust around you. Like, you want to make sure that like, if you don't know, that's okay, but make sure that you have either a vendor, whether that's a customs broker, an import specialist, export specialist, someone who's sourcing your products. Make sure you have someone who's competent in that particular field so that you're not left blindsided. So as a supplier, be very aware of where you're shipping to and the regulatory, commercial, economic current events that may impact the buying behavior and importing behavior of your customers. If you're shipping from the US overseas, same advice, basically. It's really just constant awareness. I think the worst thing that someone can do, and this is really a business principle in general, is just being price fixated and not situationally aware, right?
Mhm.
There's people can get tunnel vision to pricing, and so much so that they just start to block out everything else that is going on around them. And going back to that previous example, I remember we quoted our customer and we said these are the tariffs. This was like in March when it was going all over the place. And the customer said the same thing. They're like, that has to be incorrect. Like, that's crazy. That's just a crazy number. And when your customer comes to you like that, you have to be prepared and have the references and the resources to shoot them and educate them so that they can see it for themselves, right? You can't just give them a number. They're gonna push back, and they're going to, if you can't cite references and if you're just giving them numbers and kind of brushing it off and not taking the time to educate them, it almost seems like you're inflating your quote, or it could be perceived as that. So being very situationally aware and being very proactive in either making your customer aware or double checking that they're aware of situations is pretty paramount to earning their trust and showing that you're a competent shipper or supplier. Um, if you go to the person on the other end and say, "Hey, you are aware of XYZ tariffs or this new regulation, right? It's going to cost you this and you have to have this new documentation." And they say, "I didn't know that." You're like, "Yeah, here's the information." That will show your proficiency and your competency, and I think that'll earn their trust a lot more over someone who's just shooting out quotes and just numbers.
I love how you said that you don't have to know everything because you don't. But if you surround yourself with people who actually know what they're talking about, with either staff, with either partners as well, then that goes a lot better than actually having an ego and trying to figure out everything on your own. Because at the end of the day, we all have 24 hours. So
Right.
you can either do one or two things. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to not know everything, but if you want to get your business up and running, sometimes you kind of have to bite the bullet and either hire somebody who knows what they're doing or look for outside sources. So it is very hard, especially starting out, to gain that kind of competitive advantage. And it's just from the fact is just being educated, just being resourceful as well. If you don't have those resources at play, you're not going to go anywhere. Absolutely anywhere.
What one of what I consider my strengths, and it sounds so basic and simple, but my partners know me for this, and a lot of people when I used to work at my previous corporate jobs knew me for this, was I was always the guy that they would go to be like, "Hey Lawerence, who is the guy that did this, or who was the guy who said that, and where did you go for this trucking or that shipping line?" They knew to ask me because I had this really good habit of no matter who I spoke to, whether they came in and dropped a business card, sent me an email, or I visited them, or I used them in the past, I would always copy their email signature with all their information, or take the information from their business card. Any piece of information that I had, I would save it in my Google contacts. And then in there, there would be a section for notes. And I would always just write myself a little note. Spoke to this guy at this conference. He does this, really quick note. And what I essentially did was create my own search engine for knowing who to go to ask for that exact reason. It was a directory of resources. So I would, write down the custom broker or trucker in Indiana or specialist in Europe. And so anytime those questions would come, or for myself or for my colleagues, I'd say I would just search like Europe or trucking or rail or, whatever the hot word was, and their name would come up. And I never would just kind of disregard anyone that I met or worked with, because everyone has something to offer.
Mhm.
And I made sure to kind of keep that network of anyone that I had contact with um, close to me, right? So that I don't have to remember everything. I know who to go to. And if maybe it's not a direct connection, I know generally where to go. And maybe if I ask that person, they'll direct me to the right person, right? I always want to be no further than 2 or 3 degrees away from the right answer, So that's always been my philosophy. Yeah, you definitely can't know everything, but you have to have some general idea of where to go to get the answer that you're looking for. So that's always been my little superpower, is keeping that network close and knowing where to look and starting that journey to find information that you don't have.
That's an amazing approach. I really like that aspect. Besides staffing, besides the incomplete invoices you mentioned earlier, what is one single operational bottleneck that has the most impact in your current workflow that kind of gives a constraint into the profitability, the expansion of maximum freight, both nationally and internationally?
Um, in forwarding specifically and logistics specifically, I would say the biggest bottleneck is cash flow.
Mm.
The way that money moves within the logistics industry is very interesting. It's almost like, I don't want to say it's like another financial instrument or entity, but money management and cash flow management is very vital. The reason for that is because when you ship things, when you buy things, when your customer is buying from their supplier, they will have certain credit terms, right? When you book something with an airline or an ocean carrier, they will also have certain credit terms. And then the actual shipment itself will have specific trade terms. And when it gets to the destination, whether it's an import and export, the port and the ground carriers and the warehouse, they all have money involved in all different credit terms and agreements. So as a forwarder, you're in the middle of all of that. So in addition to just being competent and knowing how to manage the shipment, you have to also be very careful in managing the money, because every single step of that shipment has a different agreement. So the biggest bottleneck is like making sure that before you go on to the next step or book the next shipment, that the supplier is paid and you are paid and the carrier is paid and all those things are aligned. I would say that in and of itself can become just as much as of a challenge as the actual logistic part. The financial part is just as complicated, if not more complicated, than the logistics. Understanding the terms of the deal and when the cash flow is going to hit and the timing of releases of bills of lading and releases of payments. It's almost an art in and of itself.
Well, it's from the fact is as simple as what I'm going to say is you just got to do your due diligence. If you don't do your due diligence, then what's going to happen? You're going to get clientele that's going to go away. You're going to just burn a lot of bridges in a sense.
Yeah. It's, and that also goes back to really good communication
Uh-huh.
and education, because not everyone is aware of the terms, right? Not everyone, like maybe you have a supplier who is like, I need to make sure I collect my payment when it gets there. That's the agreement before you release a shipment. And other shipments might say, we've given our client credit terms that you can release the shipment and they pay us in 30 days, right? And then there's some carriers where you might have good credit terms with, and there's other carriers where you don't, or they just don't provide them. And so the best thing you can do is to go to the customer and literally lay it out like that. Like, well, your supplier is giving you this, and we understand, you know, you have X amount of time to pay. We're using this carrier. These are their terms. And when it gets here, this is what's going to be due. Customs is going to demand things to be paid within 10 days of this date. So you just lay it out. You're like, this amount of money needs to be paid in on this date. And these are the reasons why. And if you don't, then you might miss a duty payment, or your supplier is going to come back to us upset, or we're not going to be able to release it from the port because the carrier is holding on. And you're just very transparent. You don't want to make an assumption that everyone knows everyone else's trade terms, because they don't. You're the only one who knows as a forwarder, because you're quite literally in the middle of it. So you need to make sure that you make your client very aware of those terms. That's a balancing act in and of itself, for sure. Um, and I think if you don't do a good job balancing that, and then you just kind of knocking on the door to your customer, asking them to pay an invoice, and they assume that they have the same terms with you as they do their supplier, that can be a big issue, a really big issue.
A very
Yeah.
big issue. It's a
Yeah.
balancing act that could be hard, but it's something that's more worthwhile, and if you can have a 50-50 in that and balance on a good pole, then that's all that matters. It's just
Yeah.
trial and error, A/B testing. It is very hard at first, but essentially once you get your groove in that space, and it's like a cakewalk. But essentially there will be a
Yeah.
couple rotten apples in between, but it's either you can fixate on that or just fixate on, "Okay, what's next? Who can I help out with the shipping from China to here or vice versa?" It's just what am I helping out with? How are my services gonna help either this company, the general public, and you just gotta think along that aspect and not on the fact is how much profit am I getting from this? Because
Right.
while the profit is good, it's just a byproduct of what you love. And if you
Right.
really love what you're doing, if you really love doing the logistics, trying to help people out, as I mentioned, then you'll get the money. It's just from the fact is how are you gonna start to get that money? And that's the most crucial thing to figure out.
Yeah. And if you don't manage your cash flow efficiently, then sure, on paper, you might have sold a quote successfully, but if it puts you into financial restraint with your vendors, or if a supplier is upset because maybe you didn't balance those trade terms well enough with the importer and maybe they're getting paid late, you know, then everyone's unhappy. And what we found is the best thing to do is, again, from the moment that you quote, that needs to be discussed. And that's, in my experience, rarely discussed. It's just kind of, here's the number, and the expectation is we're going to get, everyone's going to get paid, and everyone's money is going to be on time. A lot of times it is, but if you are quoting a big project and there's a lot of complexity involved financially, you need to have that discussion with your customer from quote before anything moves. Everyone has to be on the same page. So again, it goes back to clear communication, being proactive and preemptive with your customer.
I agree. It's just about having that open, transparent conversation. And once you have that with the customer, then they can actually see eye to eye. You'd be more level set.
Yes.
So looking ahead into 2026, what is something that Maximum Freight is doing either internally in their front end, their back end to future proof the business to grow and expand and just prosper?
Uh, we are studying AI. Uh, we have not been using it heavily for operational purposes, but we do see the direction that AI is moving. It's going to have a heavy impact on shipping. There's
Uh,
going to be a lot more automation. And I'm not saying that our business per se will, you know, replace any operation with AI, but I think at the very least, we need to be extremely knowledgeable about it. So I play around with AI tools all the time. And it's not so much to implement it with maximum freight, but just to understand it in its context and how it might impact our industry going forward. Because where AI was at the beginning of this year compared to now is night and day.
oh,
And I'm sure
yeah.
by the end of 2026 and within 5 years, it'll be a completely different animal. So I'm
Mhm.
I'm staying in very close proximity to any AI tool and development because I think that's going to be the number one thing that influences not just the shipping industry, but the economy and every industry as we know it. So that's kind of where we're putting our focus. Haven't really figured out how to leverage it per se. But we're keeping close tabs in terms of just where we're focusing our efforts on making our business better and expanding. Just trying to build the team, slowly building new assets in terms of education and knowledge. If we don't hire new people, investing in our current staff and just slowly adding to their knowledge and education, because we saw ourselves grow by being exposed to a lot of things. So I think when people say expand your workforce and invest in your workforce, sometimes people think that's just adding new employees, but I think that that can also be making your employees more competent and educating them, right? So I think that's also key is making sure they're also aware of new rules, new laws, and just getting better at their job and understanding the customers that they serve on a more intricate level.
At the end of the day, it's just an investment. And if you take away that investment, then what's going to happen? Your company isn't going to grow. It's going to just sink, right?
Right.
So AI, it's constantly evolving every single day. As you mentioned, I do agree. We don't know what it could be like 5 years down the line. Hell, I don't even know what it could be like next year,
Yeah.
right? It's just
Yeah.
it's the rapid growth that it's doing is it's insane. It's crazy. But one thing I do like to say with artificial intelligence, a lot of people are fearful from the fact is that it's going to replace jobs. It's going to remove X, Y, and Z. Sure, yeah, it will replace jobs. but also it would expand and gain more jobs as well. I mean, you see it across
Yeah.
a couple college campuses, they're integrating AI programs, AI courses.
Right.
So as I mentioned, it complements the business. It
Yeah.
complements business, and it's all from the fact is how you use it. If
Right.
you use it for just simple mundane tasks, and what's gonna happen? You're not gonna go anywhere, but if you use it in a business sense, in an operational sense, in a logistics sense, to grow and expand your business and just find little pieces over time, those little pieces would save you money, and it's from the fact is you're not investing into another worker, you're investing into an operation that could help facilitate more and help you grow and expand. So on that level, it's phenomenal if you use it in
Right.
that sense.
Yeah, and I think throughout, you know, every decade, every century has some breakthrough technology, some breakthrough application, some major economic event. And in my opinion, maybe it's not a zero sum game. There's always consequences to everything. Um, but it's like what you said. You have to really learn about it to see how you're going to adopt its pros and how you're going to work around its cons, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Um, at the beginning of the conversation, we were talking about how we use SEO and Google search to build our business. Not to say that that's not a viable option, but it's the landscape for that has changed a lot. It's not the same way, in the past it was like you spend more money, you get more leads. That's all it was. It's not quite like that now. It's more expensive, it's less efficient, the algorithms have changed. Now people are leaning in more towards social media. They're leaning in more towards I actually think with AI, people are leaning in more towards authenticity. I think with AI, people are already kind of sick of AI generated content and on unauthentic representations of people. And so we're also leaning into more social media. We're following the trends. And so yes, with advancements come certain negatives and losses, but if you can see the angles of opportunity, you can balance those out.
Exactly. If you just see the angles of opportunity, as you mentioned, it does balance out. It may not happen night and day, but if you keep on trucking away at it, it will eventually become fruit to your labor.
Right.
So, based on everything we spoke about today, what is one piece of wisdom that you hope listeners take away about building a resilient, high stakes logistics operation from the ground up?
I would say the most critical thing is to never stop learning and to take every single experience as a learning experience. I don't think any business is easy. I think logistics is particularly hard. It can be almost like excruciating levels of frustration at times. But I will say that the harder the challenge that you overcome, the more wisdom and experience and knowledge that you gain from it. Uh, every single opportunity is an opportunity to get better and become more well-rounded. I think that me and my partners are where we are today because we took every single opportunity head on and we made mistakes and we took on some projects where we lost money and where we were banging our head against the wall. It was very frustrating. And because we did that though, it put us in a position where we had the confidence to open up our own business and go at it ourselves. So if you're starting out, whether it's in logistics or elsewhere, always be in a learning mindset, always be in a evolving mindset. And if you do that and you're always looking at every single experience as a lesson, then you're going to progress, you're going to climb, you're going to new opportunities will present themselves to you and you'll be better prepared for them. If you're just looking for, money and outright success, that's going to be a long, disappointing road. So look at it more as a personal development journey, especially in the beginning, rather than just chasing down the dollar.
That's
So that's what I
beautiful.
would probably say to
And
someone starting out.
people, as sad as it is, people are more fixated on the dollar amount because, as I mentioned earlier, people want that instant gratification. They want to have the night and day, but that's not going to happen. Even if your business is good, even if you have the right clientele, the right network, you still have to build a framework and you have to learn, grow, and expand. Because if you just stop learning, if you don't care, even if it's just like one little thing, and it just builds. It builds into something where it's huge. Because you don't want to go from 0 to 100. What's going to happen? You're going to burn out. But if you constantly integrate little habits, little learning habits each day, it could be even 5, 10 minutes over time, Monday through Friday, that could be 25 minutes, 50 minutes, right? Instead of doing nothing. Because if you don't do
Yeah.
nothing, what's going to happen? You're just going to be stagnant. You're going to be right where you are and like, oh my gosh, why am I not doing anything? Because
Uh,
you're not doing anything. You're
yeah,
not taking the liberty to actually do something.
I would add to that. I think this might even be more important than what I was saying before is if you are looking to build a business, if you are looking to grow into some, personal brand, I think the first question you have to ask yourself is what value are you providing other people? And I think
Mhm.
that question is largely overlooked, especially nowadays. People say, well, I want a million subscribers on YouTube or followers on Instagram, or I want to be a multi-million dollar company, Fortune 500 company. But that's really just a statement, right? I think the question is, well, why would I get there? Like, what would I offer to people to get to where I want to be? Because if you're not offering value to the people around you, I don't really see where your growth would come from. So you have to offer to them a service or a product or both or an experience that's positive, that impacts them positively, something that they can use and utilize in their life. Value is key. And I think when you um, look at like what's in it for you, you're skipping the most important part, which is what's in it for them,
You're not going to
you
go
know?
anywhere then.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
For anyone who wants to get connected to you, what's the best place for them to reach out?
Our website is shipmaximum.com. Uh, there's an email that's team@shipmaximum.com. All the information's on the website. If you search it, maximum freight, we should be the first search. Um, and there is I think my LinkedIn account is based on the maximum freight logistics business. So I'm there. You can also find me on there if there's any questions. And we're like I said, our approach is we give free shipping consultations. We love to educate people. I'm the forward facing person for that. So our it's not just a free quote, right? It's a free consultation. So we want people, and our new angle now is if you want to learn about shipping, if you want to learn about, you know, you have a question about importing, exporting, anything to do with the logistics industry, you can come into our office. You could talk to me on the phone. You could email us. And for absolutely no charge, we will consult you on that and educate you on that. And that's the only thing we want to offer you is to teach you. And if we become a good fit for what you're trying to do, great. But if not, no big deal. We just want to be able to offer what we know and our experience to someone who's interested in what we do.
And it's just about giving back too. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. Well, Lawrence, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And I really hope that your podcast and everything takes off. I love the questions, everything. It was great
Thank
spending
you.
time, and love what you're doing.
Thank you. I do appreciate that, really. Thank you.
Thank you.